Today we're going to talk about the quadratic formula, which will work to solve any quadratic equation that you have. If you don't want to factor, the quadratic formula would work. If you don't like completing the square, you can use the quadratic formula instead. So some people really love the quadratic formula because it works every time, as long as you follow a few rules. The bad thing about the quadratic formula is that it does take a little bit of work and a little bit of space on your paper, but each individual step is really not very difficult. The quadratic formula is especially good when you have quadratic equations that you cannot factor. In order to use the quadratic formula, you have to have your quadratic equation in standard form, which means you need to have the x squared term first, the x term in the middle, and the c term, the term that's just the number at the end. It must be equal 0, and it is incredibly helpful if your a value is positive. So if your x squared term is positive, it's going to make everything a whole lot easier. The quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Something kind of interesting for you to notice. Does that green part look at all familiar? Yes. Opposite of b over 2a. Remember when we learned about opposite of b over 2a? That's the axis of symmetry. Basically, this is saying the axis of symmetry plus a value or minus a value. It's finding those 2 points on the x-axis that are the same distance away from that axis of symmetry. So the axis of symmetry is part of the quadratic formula. One way to memorize this is to use the tune Pop Goes the Weasel. Are you familiar with that tune? Yeah. Okay, so here we go. X equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Thank you. Future YouTube star right here. Probably not. Anyway, notice I said opposite of b, so whatever your b value is, you have to put the opposite of that in there. I am not going to force you to memorize this formula. I will always give it to you. However, it is a whole lot easier to use it if you have it memorized. So let's do number 1 together. First thing we need to do is make sure that our x squared term is positive. It is. Make sure we have equals 0. We do. So what is a? A is 5. B is 3. C is -1. It is important to note that your A, B, and C do not involve any x's. It's just the number that's in front of the x's. Let's plug this into the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of B, so -3, plus or minus, big long square root sign. B squared, I always put my b in parentheses when I'm squaring it, because that way if it's a negative, then when I plug it into my calculator, I do that correctly. Minus 4 times our a value 5 times our c value -1. All over, that means the division bar goes across the whole thing, 2 times our a value 5. If you've never tackled one of these before, this looks big and awful and scary. What you need to do is grab a calculator and take the stuff that's under the square root and punch that into a calculator. Don't punch the square root in, just the 3 squared minus 4 times 5 times -1. So 3 squared minus 4 times 5 times -1. I got 29. The other thing you can do is the multiplication on the bottom. 2 times 5 is 10. We are almost to our answer. We would need to take the square root of 29 and think about, can we simplify the square root of 29? So, yeah, no, we can't. It's going to stay the square root of 29. This would be your answer. -3 plus or minus the square root of 29 divided by 10. If you wanted to see where this particular parabola crossed the x-axis, in your calculator you would do -3 plus the square root of 29, hit enter, divided by 10. This is going to cross the x-axis at 0.24 approximately, and at -0.84 approximately. On the online assignment, it's going to give you 2 fields that you have to enter your answer in. One of them would be using the plus sign, the other would be using the minus sign. But I want to direct you to this button. It's the one that looks like a fraction. You would push that button first to get the fraction in your answer. And then on the top, you'd put -3 plus square root of 29. On the bottom, you would put 10. The next one, you'd push that fraction button first to get that fraction bar. On the top, -3 minus the square root of 29. And on the bottom, 10. And those would be your 2 correct answers for that problem. Whoa. Number 2, especially as you're just starting out with this, it is helpful to write down what A is, what B is, what C is. So in number 2, A is 6, B is -8, C is 3. This one is written correctly. It says equals 0, and our x squared term is positive, so everything is fine and dandy. Get your A, B, and your C. X equals. I want you to pause the video and on your own see if you can put these numbers into the quadratic formula correctly. Once you have it down, then play the video and check to make sure that you put everything in the right place. Opposite of B, so 8 plus or minus the square root. This time our B is negative, so putting it in parentheses would be very important. -4 times A, 6, times C, 3, all over 2 times A, 6. So make sure you have everything in the right place. Next, you would take the stuff under the square root and punch that into your calculator. You could do that in your head if you wanted to, but I mean, we've got these calculators that just, you know, take all of the guessing out of it. You know, simple math. Got to be careful about that simple math. Yeah. Did you get -8?
Yeah. Whoa, I got -36.
I think it should be -8. So 8 plus or minus the square root of -8 all over 12. Now, check this out for a second. If you typed in -8 squared without the parentheses, -4 times 6 times 3, you got -136, which is not correct. So make sure if you are squaring a negative number that you put that negative in parentheses so that you get the correct answer. All right, we need to take the square root of -8 and simplify it. How can we break down the square root of -8? -1, and then 8 would split into 4 and 2. Square root of 4 is 2. That's I, and that stays square root of 2. So we have 8 plus or minus 2i square root of 2 all over 12. If you put this answer on the test, I would give you all of your points except for 1. Well, yeah, there's x equals. That's not what I take the points off for. Look at the real number pieces in this answer. There's 8, there's 2, and there's 12. Do those 3 things have anything in common? Yeah. 2. You could divide them all by 2. So you're reducing everything by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so you could write 1i or just I square root of 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Once you have simplified that, that would be your final answer. In the online assignment, you'd type in fraction button first to get the top and the bottom, 4 plus I square root of 2 with a 6 on the bottom, and then 4 minus I square root of 2 with a 6 on the bottom. Let's look at number 4. We're going to go straight to the most difficult one, because if we can do the most difficult one, we're good to go, right? First of all, is this currently set up to use the quadratic formula? No, it's not equal 0. We need to get it equal 0, and we want our x squared to be positive. So we currently have negative 7x squared and negative 3x squared. I'm going to add 7x squared to both sides, and also subtract 40x on both sides. So on the left side, I will have 0 equals. On the right side, I definitely want to do my x squared term first. So we'd have 4x squared minus 40x plus 101. I would like you to try almost all of this on your own. So figure out what A, B, and C are, plug it into the quadratic formula, start simplifying it, see how you do. Pause the video. 40 plus or minus the square root of negative 40 squared minus 4 times 101. The whole thing divided by 2 times 4. Should simplify down to 40 plus or minus the square root of negative 16 all over 8. Square root of negative 16 is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 16. So that's 4i. So we have 40 plus or minus 4i all over 8. Take a look at the real number pieces. You've got the 40, you've got the 4, and the 8. Do 44 and 8 have anything in common?
Yes.
4. 40 divided by 4 is 10. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So that would just be 1i or just I. And then 8 divided by 4 is 2. Your answers would be 10 plus I all over 2 and 10 minus I all over 2. Now, I want to show you, I wrote a little what if over here. What if you had something like 3 plus or minus the square root of 25 over 2? What is the square root of 25? 5. So this is 3 plus or minus 5 over 2. Do you see how all of those are real numbers? And there's no square roots. So this would be 3 plus 5, which is 8, over 2. So one of our answers would be 4. We would also do 3 minus 5, which is negative 2 over 2. And that answer would be negative 1. So if you simplify this and you end up with all actual numbers, no i's, no square roots, add the top, make sure you get that total from the top before you divide. So 3 plus 5, hit enter, then divided by 2. 3 minus 5, then hit enter, then divide by 2 to get your 2 actual answers. On your online assignment, most of the problems are going to work out nicely to be whole numbers. I think the last 2 are the ones where you have to simplify and all of that jazz. It is an online assignment, so go in through Clever to Big Ideas Math, find that online assignment. It's 3.4 day 1.